Okay, and I'm 2 minutes late to start, so I apologize for that. I have AV duties all over the place for this conference, getting everything recorded. Our talk today is going to be on information security in campus and open environments. First of all, a little bit about me. My name is Adrian Crenshaw. I run the website irongeek.com. We specialize in InfoSec education. Now, I'm just a geek with a lot of time on my hands, so I don't know everything. If I get something wrong, let me know your ideas. A lot of what we'll be talking about is really specific to my background and what I've seen. Different university environments differ. Some universities are research institutions, some are more focused on education, so your mileage may vary. My current qualifications, I guess you could say, besides having a master's in security informatics and working for Fortune 1000 as an information security engineer, is that I've spent a whole lot of time in academia. More than I think I probably should have. And I'm also a co-founder of DerbyCon. Now, this topic is a mile wide and an inch deep, unfortunately. And I eventually submitted this to a bunch of other conferences. I was originally actually co-presented with Matt. I put it in for ShmooCon, didn't pick it up. I put it in for DEF CON, got some feedback on it. They thought it was way too general and broad. And after actually trying to put together the slides for it, they're probably correct, because this comes sort of an overview of InfoSec in general, with a slight emphasis on, well, maybe more slight emphasis on higher education. But I want to kind of focus in on how higher education is a little bit different, at least in my experiences. So why this subject? Well, we're going to talk about the differences between, let's say, InfoSec in a corporate environment and InfoSec in a place of higher education. One of the big things is educational environments are open by design. So there's certain things that are allowed that won't necessarily be allowed in a corporate environment. Like you wouldn't necessarily filter out Facebook at a university, but you wouldn't filter out Facebook in a corporate environment depending on the particular corporation. Let's say it's not unheard of to filter that out. There's also a general lack of physical control. Let's say, well, in corporate headquarters where I work, you have to do a little bit of work. You probably still piggyback in, I suppose, if you try hard enough. You might be able to clone some RFID badges. But at a university campus, you just walk on the campus, you walk off the campus. Now, generally speaking, they do seem to do a good job on door locks for what I've seen. But, you know, those cabinets you can easily get into, wafer locks you can break. We'll go into that in just a little bit. Also, bring your own device. This wasn't even a term at universities. Bring your own device has existed since, you know, students keep coming into their own devices, always have, always will. It's not even something that you really think about in that, well, in that way of looking at it. You think about it from the standpoint of network access control, but, you know, bring your own device really wasn't a buzzword in campus environments because it was just like, that's what's expected. And another thing you'll see is a lot of early adoption and legacy apps. Now, you see things get held onto in a corporate world, of course, also. But I mean, you see people who hold on to things with dear life in universities. Like, I used this basic A app for years and years and years, and I still want to use this basic A app. Or in the case of other types of technologies, people who still have, well, this VHS tape, I have how to do this particular CPR move. It's the best thing out there. I can't find anything on YouTube, so we must have these VCRs in all the rooms. You know, those kind of things. Also, apps are put out there with a little regard for security. I've noticed a lot of applications thrown out there like, oh yeah, we got to get these installed on all the machines. Well, it requires admin privileges on machines. We can't give that. You want it next week. We don't have time to figure it out by then. Also, there's all sorts of politics and organizational problems. And a little bit of legal stuff also covered. So, why would someone want to attack a university? I mean, people go, it's not like a Fortune 500 company. I mean, it's not big money in it necessarily, so why would I want to do that? Well, all sorts of reasons. Universities generally have huge bandwidth pipes because of the research they do and the affiliations they have. So, for instance, the campus I came from, I think it had the capability of a 10 gigabit pipe. Maybe the infrastructure between them and the outside world was only capable of 1 gig at the time. That's still a whole lot of bandwidth for an attacker to want for like botnets, command control, and so forth. Also, it's great for pivots. If machines are found open, having a pivot inside of a university, let me explain the concept of a pivot. A pivot is basically leapfrogging through a network. You can compromise one machine, and from that machine, you compromise others. And let's say the machines you're coming from might be filtered because, let's say you're in Russia or someplace else, and a corporation goes, there's no reason a Russian company would ever want to visit me, or a Russian ISP would want to visit me. You might be filtered there, but you wouldn't necessarily be in your pivot. And the main reason for pivoting is just to obfuscate who is actually attacking. So universities are great for that. There's also the capabilities of free hosting. For instance, people will go out there and scan university networks looking for open FTP servers, send files up there. While I was working at a university, someone actually found an open FTP server and started posting pirated media off of it, which, well, some of those had to clean it up. Neat. There's also a lot of free resources people already have access to. I mean, I think we'll do a talk later on, eventually, on Leap in the Library, talking about all the free resources you can use to get an education using libraries, especially university libraries. There's this quote, and I can't say it exactly verbatim, but has anybody here ever seen Good Will Hunting? So look up his quote on getting an education for nothing but a few library fines. But there's some sad things about this. Well, libraries are great places to go and get free information and books and so forth, and suck down articles that you not still necessarily have copyright to. Some people have gotten in huge trouble for this. Anybody here with Aaron Schwartz? Now, this is a case of what he was doing was probably licensing terms violations, I suppose, but the administration took it way too far. He ended up having this huge sentence possibility thrown at him, and the guy eventually committed suicide, and all because he decided to hook up a machine in a wiring closet and start sucking down articles from JSTOR. Yeah, it was most likely going to be copyright infringement eventually, because I think his plan may have been to put it out there online, but still, they took that way too far. Research information is also of interest. Let's say, my background is not necessarily at a research university, but let's say you are a research university. Let's say you have like DoD contracts, or you're working with other corporations and professors there doing outside research. Well, other people might want to get in and find that research. See, also, of course, just from a student standpoint, hacking the network to be able to get tests, notes on tests, and find out grades or possibly change grades. So there's all sorts of options there. One of the things I remember I used to do, we had a physics professor who would post notes from like previous classes that he had and have similar questions. So we'd go, oh, well, he doesn't have this link on his webpage. This is the file that he's using for us now for our keys. Let me try, instead of 2005, let's try 2004 and find last year's keys to like some of the homeworks, which will give you clues on the new homeworks. That kind of thing. Alright, open by design. One of the things about universities is points to learn, in theory at least. So you want to be able to allow people to experiment. Well, this looser control does lead to some security concerns. You can't necessarily go into a professor and say, you can't do this particular thing. Let's say a particular professor wants to run a web server on a personal machine. There's ways you can accommodate this, but you usually can't necessarily easily say no. So those sorts of things, not to mention there's students who have to run their own code and may have to install certain applications to experiment with and test. So try telling the faculty that you can't necessarily run your own server. It can be difficult. This brings me to the subject of, and like I said, this is a mile wide and an inch deep, the subject of crappy apps. I've seen so many crappy apps at universities that people go, well, we need this next week. We only told you just now, but if I was to install this on my home machine, it would only take me a minute, so it should only take you a minute to implement it on 200 boxes. The thing is, you got to implement it, and implement it as not being an administrator. Luckily, this has gotten better over the years, but so many apps back in the day required people to go, oh, you have to be an administrator to run this. I'm going to write any place in your hard drive I want. I'm not going to keep it just inside your profile and a few other selected places. We're going to put it everywhere. So to implement this for students, we obviously don't want to be administrators on all the workstations. Otherwise, they woke them up pretty quickly. You have to go through and go, okay, where's this edited in the registry? Where's this writing files? Also, these little bitty problems. And also, you find old, ancient, legacy apps that people still use that you may not necessarily be able to get out of. Like, I remember, actually, I know a place at the university nearby that's still using, anybody remember DBase?
Yeah.
They're still using a DBase database for tracking stuff. And to actually get the function on a modern Windows system, there's a VM inside of a modern Windows system that's running it. All because they can't, necessarily rewrite the code, or no one wants to. And I know back in the day, I also had to recompile a whole Basic A application. Anybody ever program in Basic A? Okay, you know what a Basic A is? Because it's too old for you to remember it. So, not necessarily a lot of timetables for testing. There is a cool tool, though, I should probably tell you about that I think you should check out. Let me see if I can find it real quick. One cool tool I found for finding out where something has to write files is Procmon. If I can actually get the file all the way up. I'm on the wrong screen there. Let me smooth this over to the other screen. Procmon is pretty nifty. Essentially what it does is you can monitor what any particular program is doing, file it down and say, okay, what's it opening, what registry spot is it trying to write to, what's its network activity. And I don't really have time to show a lot of it, but definitely check out Procmon. The nice thing about it is it'll show you everything that something is doing. You can even get a little bit more filtered with it. Let me see, I'm looking at the wrong screen again. Like I say, I want to find out just everything that's going on with PowerPoint. I can focus on PowerPoint. It shows me it's reading and writing to these files. In this case, just reading. If I scroll down enough, I'll see registry keys opening and closing. And then I can go in and assign individual permissions to all of these. Also, if it's doing network activity, I should be able to do that too. You can filter it down so you only see network activity you really want. So there's none for it. And this is just things it's creating, credits creating. So that's a real useful app for being able to figure out what spots in the registry or on the file system an application is writing to. Once you know that, you can go ahead and, without them being admin, say, okay, I'll give you this, I'll give you this, and give you this, and no more. Unfortunately, it takes time to do that kind of diagnosis. Now, the reason you don't want a student to be admin, obviously, is because they're going to get hosed boxes. They're going to install all sorts of crapware. They're going to click yes to every single email they get. The boxes are going to become unusable in short order. Now, way back when, we used to run labs that were running Windows 95. And there was only so many things you could do to lock down a Windows 95 box, which meant you were constantly nuking those things every single week to keep them all stable. Well, those other tools that you have to make people be admin that you can use to make sure that, well, if they do bulk up the box, you can quickly reset it. Now, Microsoft used to put out Steady State for free, and that was a pretty nice app. What it would do is, after you reboot the machine, it would set everything back to its original state. So everything they installed, all that crap they did, all the changes they made, would go away. Unfortunately, Steady State is no longer there, and even when it was there, if you were an admin on the box, which was the whole point of using Steady State to a degree, you could turn it back off. So you could turn it off, do your changes, then turn it back on, and your changes would stay. So I didn't see it as really useful for these purposes, but I guess if you trust your students to not be malicious, but didn't trust them not to do something stupid, it'd probably still be pretty good. Now, Microsoft has an article on how to replicate it, what it used to be able to do. And by the way, I'll put all these slides out on my webpage later on, and there's an article out on my webpage about all this as well, where you can find most of the information. If you go to my webpage, or just Google for Iron Geek Campus Security 2013, you should be able to find it. And I'll link up to most of the applications I'll mention here. There's also commercial tools like Deep Freeze for locking down a box so that every time it reboots, it goes back to its original state. That's real handy. And I haven't messed around with the alternatives, but this is a great website called alternative2.net, and you can type in some software product, and it will show you a bunch of different other options you can try out. And apparently there's a bunch of free and open source tools out there where people have tried to replicate the functionality of Deep Freeze. Now, I haven't had the time to sit down and try them all, but it's something to look into. I'm all about free applications. Generally, it's hard to get budget at the university, so if you can get it free or open source, kill it. Until you start putting up Linux boxes and you're the only person that runs Linux, in which case, not a whole lot of support there. Alright, so besides crappy apps, there's also malware. Universities get hit pretty bad. There's usually inside, well, Dave used the term flat network before. It might be segmented at least into subnets, but generally once you're inside of a university network, it is usually completely open. Anybody can reach anything they want. So you have a tendency to have hosed boxes. You have malware infections that get out there landish pretty bad. The only way to clear up a lot of these problems, especially where there's like some professor who's an admin on his box because of politics, you can't make him not be an admin box. He hosts his machine. How do you clean it? Generally, the simplest thing is just a nuke rebuild. It's the only way to be sure. Because have you ever tried to remove malware from like your mom's computer, and no matter what you do, it always comes back because it has a companion process that says, "Oh, you killed this. Oh, we installed that," and sitting there tag teaming your system, you never get everything gone. Well, nuking and rebuilding is the only option. Now, a tool we used to use a lot for that was Semantics Ghost. Did a really good job of getting the hard drive, throwing it out there. You can do multicast with it, so you can have like an entire lab get the image at one time and saves on a lot of bandwidth. There's also open source alternatives. So if you go out to OS Alt, this is similar to the previous webpage I mentioned. You can type in some software package, in this case Ghost, and it'll give you alternatives that are open source that you can give a shot. Because, who doesn't like free? Also, another thing to do with the whole Ghost thing is make sure you train your users where to put files. Because when someone bulks with a box and you have to move them to a new machine, it's really painful to ask them, so, where's most of your data in backup? It's in Word. Makes me sad every single time. There is an alternative solution to that. Microsoft puts out a product called, and it's free, Windows Easy Transfer. What it will do is it will look at the image and go, or actually look at the hard drive directly. I shouldn't use the term image in this case. It'll look at the hard drive directly and go, okay, this all looks like files the user added, configuration changes the user made. I'll suck all those up, put it in its own little file, then you can use Easy Transfer on the new machine and push it all down. So they get back most of the stuff. You may have to install applications and so forth, but it'll get your Word docs, your backgrounds, that kind of thing. It's a pretty awesome tool. Another thing that's a little bit different about a university is there's not even a physical perimeter. I touched on this a little bit ago. Has anybody ever heard of the analogy of the candy analogy for a network? Hard on the outside, soft, chewy center. Once you break through the perimeter, you can generally get in and do things. Universities, by their very nature, have machines just sitting out there in the open where people can walk up and touch them, get to them, have physical access. And there's this quote, and if you can find the earliest source for this quote, let me know. If a bad guy has unrestricted physical access to a computer, it's not your computer anymore. Because when someone has physical access, it's all sorts of cool attacks someone can pull off. And I'm surprised I don't see this more often. I know it's not because students are so ethical, because I've seen students doing things that make me go, okay, you could look at the files in that thumb drive and pick up who owns it, but instead you just clear it and keep it yourself. So it's the students don't even think about doing some of these things, luckily. But if someone decides to be malicious, there's all sorts of attacks that can be pulled off. For instance, password resets in the local box. They could bypass the password entirely using some tools I can show you. There's pass the hash, which I'll explain in a bit, and password cracking. The first thing, the easiest thing to do, if someone wants to have big admin access to a local machine so they can do things, these things to do. They may just want to do something simple as, well, I want to install this peer-to-peer file app, and I can be admin to do it, so I'm going to reset the password, become an admin, and install this. Or they could just want to become admins so they can install a keylogger, get the professor's password, and go look around their account for grades. Whatever. There's several ways of resetting local passwords. Well, remember back in the day in Windows 2000, you should be able to take the SAM file, rename it, recreate a new SAM file with blank everything, log in as that, then you can do what you wanted, then replace the original SAM. You couldn't do that in Windows XP. There's still various tools for resetting the password, and I linked to a bunch of them here. I'm only going to mention a few of them. Bart's PE Builder used to come with something called Sal's Password Renew. Now, it was really great because it would install a service on the machine while you were booted from a thumb drive or a CD, and then when the machine booted next, it would install the service and it would reset the password to whatever you wanted. It stopped working around, I don't know, I think sometime in Windows 7 it stopped working. But luckily there's NT password edit, which you can use from a boot, USB, or CD, and just change the local password. Now, when you change the local password, some things like, let's say, stored passwords in Firefox and other places may no longer work, but it does get someone into the machine and it does make them an admin. There's also just bypassing the password. Has anybody seen Conboot? Conboot is this little boot utility. You plug it in, you boot from it, and then you have a blank password. You just log in, blank password, do whatever you want as admin. It's as simple as that. Now, the free version they have out there is only for Windows 32-bit, but there's a commercial version that is 64-bit, and it works just fine. Just carry it around my thumb drive, you can boot it up, and instant admin. Oh, it also works on Linux boxes. I think they may have added OS X support since then. Slightly different process, but still, it lets you get into all these systems by blanking the password. And then when you reboot the machine again, it's back to its normal password. It does a modification in memory to do what it wants to do. It again has the problem of locally stored passwords for like browsers and so forth may not be accessible because the password you entered to begin with is used for encrypting the later passwords that are stored in applications. But still, it's out there. By the way, as far as password recovery tools for individual applications, has anybody got the Nearsoft yet? I love Nearsoft. Nearsoft puts up so many awesome tools. If you name an application that you want to find the password for and you know it's stored somewhere on the hard drive, he probably has a tool for it. You want to dump all the Firefox passwords? He's got something for that. IE, he's got that. Mail, he's got that. He just does a ton of things with password recovery. Definitely a fun thing to check out. There's also the way of making boot media for getting into a box, because once you have physical access, you can boot from what you want. You can start using these tools for resetting, or for just, if you don't want to use the capacity, you just want to suck data off it, you can do that too. There's portable boot devices, and I have a whole bunch of articles on these. We even did a few sessions on making your own. How many people have ever made a bootable Windows USB or DVD? Look at the tools from WinBuilder. You can actually take a Windows 7 CD, and I'm sure there's a Windows 8 version of it now, and build from it, from that DVD, your own little bootable USB or DVD that can run almost any tool you wanted to, including these password reset utilities. And just have it there, boot from it, don't leave anything on the local hard drive, and have your way with the machine. There's also ways of dual booting it with tools like Backtrack or Kali Linux, and we have tons of videos out on our website on how to do that. And a while back, we actually had some sessions at the ISSA how to do it. It's way too large a topic for me to cover here, but if you go out to that article I mentioned earlier on, I have links out to videos showing us actually building these little boot USBs and DVDs. Okay, so what? They only got privileges to a local machine. Let's say they got in, they maybe dumped the password hashes from, how many people understand what a password hash is? I'm going to explain it just in case. The way your password is stored on a local machine, it doesn't actually store your straight password, because that would be very insecure. You just go out there, pull out the hard drive. What it does is, it hashes it. It uses certain algorithms to make a one-way transform of your password into, well, let's say a binary value, usually represented in hexadecimal. You can't take that and easily reverse it back, though. So by doing this, what it does is whenever you log in, it will compare the password you entered, it will take it and hash it, then compare it to the stored hash. But by just having the hash, you can't easily reverse it. All various password attacks that you do. You can try dictionary attacks, like trying all the common words that someone might try to use as a password. You could try brute force, where you just try every possible combination of a certain set of characters. Or you do hybrid attacks, where you take a dictionary and you modify things in it. Like, you take the word Adrian and then you start replacing the A with an @ symbol, or the I with a 1. Or you start tacking on 01, 02, 03 at the end. And there's also ways of getting around cracking passwords that way. But here's the big horror story why someone should worry about someone hacking a local machine. Sure, professors or administrator's machine might be behind an office door, but if someone can compromise a local machine, they can use that to compromise other boxes. And here's basically how it works. Let's say you have your first frat boy Bob comes in and he's going to want to get to some systems. Well, first he has to become local admin on a particular machine. Once he's local admin on that particular machine, he can do things like grab the SAM and system hives, these registry hives that store the passwords and credentials and so forth. Well, they don't store the password directly, they store the credentials in the forms of hashes. But they grab the SAM and system file, and they can start cracking passwords. Once he's cracked the passwords on one system, well, how many people in here actually work at a university? Anybody? Okay. And how many people work at a corporation? Or any kind of company? How many of you use a unique password in every single system? Didn't think so. How many of you use essentially the same password on every single machine that comes from the same image? The same local administrator password? Probably most of you. No one's raising your hand, but I'm pretty sure a lot of you do. So if he cracks that local password on some workstation, almost guarantee you that the same local password would let them in to other machines all across the network. You can pretty much guarantee that. Barring that though, let's say he walks into a classroom, goes to the instruction station, because no one says anything about that, he could just say he's practicing for his presentation later on, installs a keylogger after becoming admin, and then collects passwords that way. But once he has a local password or a domain password from a keylogger, he can then reach out across the network and get to any other machine that he actually wants. And I have tons and tons of material out there on how to crack passwords. Depending on how complicated they are, it's really not very difficult. And some people choose really silly passwords. We'll go talk to mitigation about that in a little bit. But as I was saying before, people use the same password all over the place. So if you get it one place, you can generally leapfrog your way across the network. Or you can install a software keylogger and get credentials that way. and you just repeat it from machine to machine to machine. You get from this machine, you get to another machine, you start dumping passwords. From that machine, you get more passwords, and so on and so forth. You just continue to chain. What is making it easier, though? That password hash I mentioned before, sometimes you don't need to crack the password. Like, for instance, if I can get the admin hash on one box, and all the other machines that are from that same image are using the exact same local password, you just grab the hash and say, okay, I'll use these tools, I'll use this hash, and authenticate that way to other machines. You don't even have to know the password, because you have the hash. And that hash is enough to be able to do the challenge response if necessary. Metasploit has some things for doing this, like the PSXZ tool. If you grab the hashes from one box using Metasploit, you have them token on a box, and then have it start pivoting from that box to other boxes using hashes you've obtained. Really nice, fun stuff. There's also a hash-to-hash toolkit, so once you get a hash from one box, you can use it to escalate privileges on, well, to reach out and authenticate to other machines on the network. Now, you can also crack password hashes that are, well, not the locally stored password hashes. That's mostly what I've been talking about so far. Once you're a local admin, you can maybe become domain admin by, well, getting a keylogger installed in the box. But if someone logs into a box, a version of the password is still hashed on the local machine for, well, I guess, availability reasons. How many people have ever had the domain controller go down? But you need to log in. On a Windows box, you can still log in, couldn't you? That's because by default, the last 10 logins are cached. You can change this, but the last 10 logins are cached. Now, it uses a much more complex algorithm than what local passwords will use, what local password hashes are. There's actually MS Cache version 1 and version 2. Both use the username as the salt. And they're hard to crack, especially MS Cache version 2, but it's still possible. So if someone grabs those hashes and it's a really simple password, it's possible to crack that, especially in the MS Cache version 1 scenario, and be able to grab domain credentials off the local boxes that are cached there. Keen-enable has the capability of doing that. I myself would probably look at other tools, but Keen-enable will let you dump it, and then you can load it in other tools. Who's ever heard of Hashcat? Hashcat is freaking awesome. This is the fastest cracking tool I've ever seen. Now, I mostly just connect to regular Hashcat, which uses the CPU, and one time I thought I had a mistake in my syntax as I issued the commands, said, okay, crack this. And I got back to my prompt instantly like, oh, what a break. It must have failed. Downloaded it. Oh, no, it didn't fail. That's my password. That was the CPU-based version. If you go from the GPU-based versions, you can actually do it much faster because the graphics processor in a lot of machines is way faster for certain types of parallel operations than a CPU is. So you can start cracking big time. My buddy Martin actually runs a service from Question Defense where he has a box that has like several high-end video cards in it, and people will submit password hashes, and for money, they'll crack them and send you back what the password is. And of course, there's also, once you're on a box, you may be able to pull out passwords that are locally stored from browsers, mail clients, and so forth. Again, look at Nearsoft for those tools. Nearsoft is pretty awesome for that. Okay, mitigations. There's a few mitigations for these general password attacks. One, don't store local passwords. Now, in the case of a Windows machine, a local machine, you probably won't want to have an administrative account of some kind, so you can log into it, of course. But what I mean by this is, if you're out and about, let's say you're a professor, you probably don't want to say yes to that little method that says, hey, you want me to save this password whenever you log into Gmail. If it's not a machine in your office, don't say yes to those kind of things. Also, don't use LM hashes. I haven't really explained what LM hashes are, but it's an older algorithm that they stopped using in Vista. At least they stopped this automatic storage of it in Vista. But the way it used to work was they'd take a password, they'd truncate it into 2 7-character chunks, and make sure everything's uppercase. And then they'd hash each individual part. Well, in reality, instead of being a 14-character password, that's actually 2 7-character passwords that are all single case, all upper. So it was incredibly easy to crack. Because of the mathematics behind it, it's easier to crack 2 7-character passwords than it is 1 14. Also, another thing you might want to try out is maybe making it to where write a few scripts that automatically change the local password so you don't use the same one all over the place. Now, the problem with this is people have to go look up what the password is. What you can do is come up with a little application that goes, okay, this is my common password. I have basic information in the box, let's say the MAC address in the box. I have this common password I have, okay? My little application takes the password I have that's in common with everything, concatenates it with the MAC address of the machine, then produces a hash, outputs that, and that hash is the password I should log in with. That way you have something that everybody can either find or already knows, but if someone finds the local password for that one particular machine, it doesn't do them any good, because it's only for that one particular box. So that's going to take some scripting to roll out. You can also lock down the BIOS or the UEFI if you're talking about a much newer machine using those features, so that people can't boot from their own media. That's going to cut things back somewhat, but if they can get to the machine physically, it's possible they can open the box up, pull the battery, look online how you reset the BIOS or UEFI, and get in a blank password anyway. You may or may not notice that. Now, a lot of people keep this from happening. Well, first of all, doing that does cause some support issues because you can't move the media. It makes it harder for IT support to actually go through and rebuild a whole classroom of machines. But they can still maybe work around it. You can lock the case to keep people from going in and resetting the password. But if you go down to a lockpick pavilion downstairs, you'll see how easy those master locks, a lot of people put on those long cable locks, are to actually pick. They're not too difficult. And by the way, none of this actually stops people from using hardware keyloggers. Down in our Hacker 12 room, there's several hardware keyloggers we have around the table. You just plug them in line with the keyboard into the machine, and it logs all the keystrokes someone sends. Someone plugs it off, takes it back home, dumps the passwords, or dumps everything that was typed, and by looking at what was done, they can figure out where the passwords are. Another thing that's a little bit different about universities is people in politics. One of the things I've noticed that even people who should know well about things in security in universities don't necessarily. Like, I met some comp/InfoSec professors who had to define what pen test was, and two of them. And then there was another one who I was, actually I think she may have been one of the same people who I defined pen test to. I was writing an article on malicious USB devices, and at one point I say, a hardware keylogger will sometimes appear as a USB hub type device. And they asked, I don't understand what a hub is in relation to networking, but what is a hub in relationship to USB? Now understand that comp sci is ultimately mathematics, but still I expect someone who's teaching comp sci to understand what a USB hub is. Also, there's really silly attitudes about knowledge and what people should and should not be allowed to do. For instance, I had a big kerfuffle way back when, and one of the things they used against me was, well, let me quote the particular schmuck. Additionally, Mr. Critchell's personal website, housed on university resources, is a compendium of links to known computer hacker websites, hacker toolkits, and other hacker resources. And this is used as an attack against me. I think he had no freaking clue what it is he did, which is kind of, well, irritating, because a lot of people, I remember once I talked about hacking, and it was with my barber, which obviously I haven't visited in years. But when I mentioned hacking, she said, well, is that illegal? You understand that from someone who was a hairdresser, but you would think something better from a professor. But unfortunately, the attitude is pretty common. Now, this is a quick little story. I added this. We were having the DerbyCon conference this last weekend, and Sterling Riggs posted this thing on his Facebook. I don't know how I feel about this DerbyCon happening at Hyatt downtown. It's a convention for computer hackers. Sessions include password cracking, hacker war games, and lockpicking pavilions. Thoughts? And the very thing seems kind of there to incite people to make, well, comments. Like this one that says, that's stupid. We complain about how it's not safe to do anything online, yet we hold conventions to teach people how to hack. Brilliant. And more comments that were just plain bad. You have to go through all of them, but people just think that there's like comments like we should arrest them on site, and the Louisville Police Department should be there to get everybody, and it's just nutty levels. Now people are making more rational comments like, it's probably illegal. Someone said something about, oh, the FBI should show up there, and someone else said it's probably a recruiting tool for them. At least that one makes sense. We had a fair number of feds out there, that seems as much imagined. I pointed out to my InfoSec buds, like, can we point out to these people that are not really getting an idea what the conference was about? Well, it got inundated with so many people in the InfoSec community that eventually the post was just freaking deleted. Luckily, Jason Street saved some, and that's why I got these screenshots. And he's also put them out there on the website. I think the last comment I actually saw on the thread before it got deleted was Eve Adams, who said, kill him with kindness and hack him with hugs. But you know, the term hacker means so many different things to people. If you use it at university, people freak out. Another thing I noticed with universities is ethics or a lack of ethics. This was it. I was an MBA student at IU Southeast for a while, and I was in a business law and ethics class. And the number one thing I learned about ethics there was that the instructor, the director of the program, and the dean had no idea what ethics actually were. Actually, that's not quite a fair statement, because I think they understood ethics in the same way that I understand polymorphic shell code. I can kind of vaguely describe it. I can put some slides about it, but I can't implement it. The key difference there is I feel bad about the fact I can't implement it. But anyway, universities are odd because you get fired for what you do, not for what you don't do. So don't rock the boat. You see people really drag their feet to implement any kind of change. If you do something and screw something up, you might get fired. But if you do nothing, well, it's easier to shift the blame to someone else. Also, tenure is just a freaking bad idea. It doesn't make people bold and stand up for new ideas. It doesn't make people any more open in their research as far as I can tell. Most of these people aren't really researching anything that's going to be controversial anyway. Most of them also don't want to rock the boat because they have to work with other people around them. There might be merit-based raises, so they still don't want to piss off other people who are around them. So it doesn't really seem to make faculty any more bold on research or as far as fighting for rights, but it keeps the bad ones from ever getting fired. Also, how do you enforce rules on people who can't be fired? I have a story from somebody at Ohio University where they came through and said, Professor, you set all of these IPs in these machines to stuff that's already taken. You have to change all your passwords. And he's like, tenure, you change your, change your IPs. He said, tenure, you change your IPs. So this one professor, because he has tenure, can screw up the IP scheme of the entire network and you can't do anything about it? No, I don't think so. And essentially, some universities, you think you'd see better behavior from professors? I used to have this idea, maybe I watched movies like Dead Poet Society too much. You see these respected professors, these learned people, but when you start messing around with more and more professors, you realize that university administrations and a lot of professors, it's not like a high school clique with more gray hair and tweed. It's not pretty. But is this common? I really don't know. I know the plural of anecdote is not evidence, but I started looking around at other cases out there online. Go to the FIRE sometime, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, and you see some really asinine things go down with college professors and administrators. Like this one guy said something, he didn't like the idea of spending money on a parking lot because he thought it was a waste of money, and he put it as name of some administrator, memorial parking lot. But because he used the term memorial, they tried to kick him off campus because it was threatening, because he was saying that the administrator was going to die because it was a memorial. That's kind of a stretch. Also, I remember someone got in trouble for racial harassment because he was reading a book on the Klan and how people were stopping the Klan. But it happened to have a picture of the burning cross on front of it, and the person who saw it didn't bother to read what the book was actually about. It was actually, anti-Klan, but people freaked out about that. But if you wonder about university administrations and general bad behavior, also look at the Jay Sadusky case. Now, granted, things about this in the administration we don't know yet. But so maybe they knew less than some people think they knew. But it seems likely that it's people in the administration that knew some of the things that Sadusky was up to, and rather than actually try to take care of the problem, try to cover it up because they, want those alumni donations coming in. If the university is willing to cover up things as bad as child molestation, can you imagine all the more minor things they're willing to cover up? Also, look at the Clery Act. It's so bad at various university administrations as far as covering up crimes on campus that they decided to pass a law that forces them to publish this information. And look at what happened in this Clery and why that act was passed and some of the other events that led to it. I hope not all schools are this way, but your mileage may vary. Another thing about universities is bring your own device has always been there. They didn't even have a term for it. It was just kind of expected. There's things that can be done for that. Like you don't want to, first of all, not having flat networks. Many universities are very much flat networks. Once you have an IP anywhere on it, you can get any place. There's network access control for controlling where those people can get to and how they authenticate, make sure they have proper credentials. And there are some free tools for doing that. PacketFence.org is one you should check out. There's also FreeNAC, though I believe that project might be dead. Besides the local password attacks I mentioned earlier, there's also remote password attacks, where you essentially just pound boxes with every password you want to try. And the problem with these is they're first noisy. If anybody's watching the logs, which they probably aren't, but still, if anybody's watching the logs, they're going to see all these failed password attempts. And two, it's slow. Cracking a password on a local machine with a hash is generally pretty fast because you can do it all inside the CPU and memory. Doing it across the network, you got a lot more latency. That said, remote password attacks that work is default passwords. If you scan a network, I guarantee you will find tons of network equipment that has default passwords on it. You know, your printers with no passwords, webcams with default passwords, so on and so forth. Oh, DRACs. Remember DRACs, Dell Remote Access Controllers? Basically, you connect to them, and it's like a VNC session. You see the desktop machine. So many people leave that as the default, which I believe is like, what, root Calvin? I believe it's root Calvin, that you just find them all over the place. Webcams and teleconference material as well. Printers, people don't even think about locking down printers. Savins especially have this bad tendency of, people have a tendency to save documents to them. And if you visit them from a web page, you can actually pull down PDFs that people have saved on the machine. Well, inside these PDFs, you might find things, well, let's say I have a friend, Bob. He once found someone's timesheet with a social security number on one of these printers. There's also students trying to get free print jobs, which I'm surprised they don't do more often just by directly printing the port 9100 on the box. And some printers, and Daryl highlights more research on this, some printers actually have ways where they store a password for the domain inside the printer. But if you can get to the printer, you can pull domain credentials out of it. But you'd have to look up some of Daryl Highland's work on that. DRACs again, see. And oh, Soho NASes. People put Soho NASes out there, leave the defaults on, open file shares to everyone. And so small office home office NASes, when it's inside someone's home network, that might be okay. But doing it for school and people can find it and just grab files, not so good. There's a few great tools for finding these. I like SoftPerfect's NetScan. It's pretty awesome. You can scan an entire network. It shows you open file shares, puts a little red mark on each one you have write access to, so you know what's out there. And just puts a normal folder for ones you have read access to. I've used this for finding all sorts of things. You know, some silly person someplace has gone, oh, I want to share this with another professor. Right click, share, take the default, which in older versions of Windows was read and write to everyone. Newer versions of Windows, it's just read to everyone. And for finding web apps, RAR, Rapid Assessment and Web Resources is an awesome tool. That's by Adam and Tom. Here's a screenshot of NetScan showing some open file shares found in my local home network just for test purposes. It also tells me who the maker of the product was, a little bit more information. But it's great to find open file shares. RAR, what it does is it will scan an entire network, and then it will grab screenshots of each web page. But once you have the screenshots of each web page, you can go, oh, that's a printer, that's a printer, that's a printer, and you can go visit them. Also, it gives you suggestions for what the default password might be. Another thing that people can do is, well, let me see if I can get this to work. You can actually Google for different, I'm trying to get this thing up in the, let me go over here. You can actually use Google to find printers that are out there on networks. For instance, this one's using site:. That's saying find the only things that end with edu, and I could use that as papermill.edu and specify a particular university. And my web browser is not wanting to respond as of right now. But these are all search strings for finding printers that people just have out there on the public internet and you can go look at. Because of time, I'm going to go on because my web browser is not functioning right now. But look up Google hacking sometime. This is, oh, okay, that would be one of the reasons it wasn't working. Firefox needed an update. And now it's probably going to come up 5 times. Well, I'm going to keep speaking until the speaker next kicks me out the stage. So, come on, do your thing. This is why I connected to the internet earlier. Alright, and here's a few, or should be a few printers to come up, but it's coming up so slow that I'm going to go ahead and move back to the slides. The connection is awfully slow. You can also find webcams and ads and also other things using various tools like that. To attack them as far as brute forcing across the network, THC Hyper is good, Medusa is another one, Brutus. And if you want to just go find default password lists, those 2 URLs are good lists, and I should have them all in my article. Also, another word on passwords. What should you have as a default password for a new account? I think most universities are now, when a new student first comes in, they assign them a password and you have to generate your own account. That's probably a better call. I know people used to use social security numbers as the password, which was really easy to crack for one thing. And second of all, once you crack it well, you have to put some social security numbers. I wish more people would not do these like short passwords that are really complex to remember, because it encourages people to, one, write them down. Can be bad. To keep in your wallet, not so bad, but still. Besides because you write them down, people have predictable patterns. I think Martin did some work on something. I think he referred to as password fingerprinting, where there were certain patterns because of the rules people set aside that you know they're going to try. So you try certain common passwords, and you try certain things like 2 characters on the end that are numbers, letters for numbers substituted in the middle, and it actually made it easier to crack. To explain it a different way, let's say you had a 40-character password, and you only use characters of the alphabet and spaces, so you have a passphrase. And this is just, well, single case. This is the number of possibilities you have for a 40-character passphrase. And that's not a huge line. Now, if it's a 10-character, but everything you can type on keyboard, it's still actually a very much smaller number and easier to crack. So go for passphrase when you can. Because of time, I can't read that out to you, but it's actually a great XKCD article on the, cartoon on the whole thing. Another thing people should look into is social networks. The amount of information students give away is just tremendous. We have a video out on iMeet.com on how to cyberstalk people and find out information on them. That's about 4 hours long. But to give you an example of this happening in real life, look at the case of George Bronk. What George did was he used people's Facebook profiles to find out information about them. Then from that, he was able to hack their phones because you'd have like a password reset. It's like, well, what's your dog's name? Well, the Facebook might have the dog's name. So we said that, grab images off the phones, and use them to blackmail to get more images from other people. I won't say what kind of images he was getting from them, but let's just say he was hacking co-eds. Enough said. Another thing to do was a little bit different is they got in on the IP space grab early. Since I used to work for a place that had about 7,000 students max, but they had a class E, so over 65,000 hostile IP addresses for 7,000 students. But since they had so many IP addresses, they weren't limited by space restrictions, so a lot of them didn't necessarily adopt NAT early, network address translation. So what would end up happening, instead of having a non-nautical, or I should say, 1918 address behind everything, what they would do is they'd have everything public on the internet. Anybody can come see it, everybody can find it, and they don't do any natting whatsoever. And that allows people to do all sorts of fun things, like finding open ports and everything, reconfigure devices. Like I was trying to bring up Google and show you some printers people have out there. You can find tons of printers on the internet at universities just using Google. Or do reverse DNS on each machine and figure out, who actually owns this particular IP? Who's actually running this machine? For instance, here's a, modified version of an Nmap scan. You can do a list scan, that's dash lowercase s, uppercase L, and look for a series of IPs. That's supposed to be a dot, not a slash. And it will return a reverse DNS lookup on each machine. Well, let's look at what we got back on each one of these machines. From these names, you can figure out this is probably a room number, this is the department, this is probably a username. So now I have an idea for this particular IP address, what user was actually on that machine. That might be useful information. And actually, the other day, I found someone from my old campus visited my website. So what I did was, the name is this. I'm going to Google around IUS and that name. Oh, that's who that is. So I went out to LinkedIn and tried to add him. I don't know if he's accepted yet, but that probably freaked him out just a little bit. Now, the solution to all this is to, is the next speaker in here up yet? He's not in here, but I'm going to keep talking if y'all don't mind. I'm long-winded on these kind of things. Turn off file sharing would be the first thing. If you don't need a service, turn it off. To agree, a firewall is kind of a band-aid because if you don't want the service, or you don't want a port accessible, why is the service running on that interface to begin with? But turn it off, firewall it off. Make sure people aren't admins so they can't automatically right-click and share anything out there. Scan your network for Soho NASs that are a little bit too open, and see what people are actually sharing out there to everyone. Too many people just right-click, say share everyone, and you won't know about it unless you scan for it. Let's see. Also, there's open file share mitigations. Train users how to use it if they're going to use it at all. Let's see. Another thing to be done is to watch your logs. Now, most people don't. You can set up some things to do that. I have some scripts out on my website for looking through web logs for common attacks like promote file include and the like. And I have actually a list of all these different web shells people try to use against my site. And what my site does is it says, oh, you're trying to use that against me. I'll log that, I'll give it to everybody on the internet, and I'll make an archived copy of your web shell so that I can share it with the community to research and diagnose. But if you want good log collecting software out there, there's a few open source projects to check out. Graylog2, OSIM, and Security Onion is awesome. It's like it's its own distribution of Linux that's made everything easy to run things like Snort and various other tools from its environment. I mean, it just simplifies, because if you try to do a default install of Snort on your own without any help on like a default Linux, it can be a pain. So thankfully there's Security Onion. There's also giving students personal websites. Back in the paper I used to work for, they were giving access to students to be able to put whatever they went on the web server, and they had PHP out there. They didn't do anything to restrict PHP on it, and so you could actually get away with using that particular PHP command. For those that don't know, what that does is it shovels a shell back to me, and I have a command prompt on your remote machine because I can put a web page on it. And from there, if you don't have file restrictions down right, you can do a lot more. By the way, here's my collection of information on my collection of web shells. You can find out here. If you're having to worry about web app security at the university, definitely check out the OWASP project. Our local chapter has a table out there. And Jeremy Druin, who's also at this conference, has a ton of tutorials out there on it. Where's the next speaker?
Oh, he's here now.
Alright. I apologize for running way over, and I should get off. I'm not sure how much more I have actually, because I've underestimated massively. Won't we just look through how many more minutes?
Give it like 5 minutes.
Alright. Another thing to look into is sniffing. Network sniffers out there, people don't realize all the protocols that are going plain text across the network, and they might even think about like configuring the Cisco routers using Telnet. Use a tool like Kane or EtherCat, you can sniff those out and pull passwords off the line. And we have videos upon videos on imgeek.com on that. And back in 2011, we had a class on nothing but network sniffers. And it showed you how to plug passwords off the line, off the wireless, off the Ethernet, how to do ARP poisoning and direct traffic through you and be able to get stuff. Now, ARP poisoning is essentially a way of routing traffic through you even on a switched environment. There's mitigation against that, where you make a static ARP table. And I have a tool out there called ARP Freeze, which allows you to easily edit static ARP entries. So you may want to check that one out. Network awareness, of course, you don't know what your vulnerabilities are or what your possible ways in are unless you know what's out there. There's tons of tools out there for mapping out your network, figuring out what's out there. Nmap, of course, being one example, but NAGALs, which is a more automated way of doing it, scans your network, sees differences, see what new things have popped up. There's also scanning for vulnerabilities with Nessus and Expose. Unfortunately, there is an open BAS, which is an open vulnerability scanner, but so far I haven't had a whole lot of luck with it. Of course, another bit of advice, patch. Third-party tools. Third-party things are a little bit harder to patch than Microsoft stuff, but there are some tools out there for doing that. Word on wireless. Oh, I'm going to move on to one last thing, and then I'm done because this is running way long. A word on compliance. There's probably a thing about compliance that, how do you put this way? People are doing quite a bit more compliance in general than I do. Universities get hit by so many different things compliance-wise. There's definitely PCI, because if you accept money at vending machines or the bookstore, that PCI comes into play. If you're an institution that's doing healthcare, which a university hospital is, HIPAA is going to come into play. If you're doing stuff for like the federal government, this is most likely to come into play. You're doing kind of research there. But one that's kind of specific that people don't necessarily mess with outside of academia is FERPA. And I wanted to mention FERPA for a second. So, at this point, if anybody's watching the video, I don't grant any professor or administrator to view this. I use all legal rights. At this point, I consider it copyright infringement if you keep watching. No, I don't believe that was actually legally binding, but I want to say it anyway. FERPA has 3 main parts. One, it gives students access to their own records. It also gives students the ability to amend records that are not true or not accurate. It also allows them to control the disclosure of student records. It's only for schools getting money from the U.S. Department of Education, by the way. So why is it pretty fucking useless? Let's start with it for a second. First of all, if someone breaches your data, you have no right to individually sue. Look up Gonzalez University versus Gonzalez University versus Doe. this guy tried to sue him, and they said, oh, no particular individual right, so you can't do that. Okay, so I can't use the law to sue somebody. Also, I can never find any case of a university ever losing money because of a breach. Never had seen any federal funding ever pulled. Now, they'd be wrong. I've asked fellow people in academia, can you find a case? And no one ever has. So if it has no teeth, what's the point? And another thing, one of the things inside of FERPA is that students, if they find something that they think is not accurate, should have the right to amend. Now, or at least put their version of events in something. However, the university doesn't have to amend a record, but if they don't amend it, they're supposed to put the student's version in as well. Okay, that all seems fair, except for, and here's this line. Thus, while FERPA affords eligible students the right to seek amendment, education records which contain inaccurate information, this right cannot be used to challenge a grade or an individual's opinion or a substantive decision made by a school about the student. Okay, let me get this. Grades, okay, can't complain about that, can't get my version put in. Individual's opinion, so a faculty can put their opinion in, but a student can't put their opinion in? And substantial decisions, does that mean everything? So do you think of anything that a student ever would have put their version of events in on that doesn't fall into one of those categories? So what's the point of having the law there whatsoever? It's kind of annoying. And that's pretty much all. Sorry that's mostly links, and sorry for the next speaker that I ran way over. Come up to me during the conference. I'd be interested in hearing your own experiences at universities. I think it's kind of interesting. LivyCon next year, come if you can, and thank you very much. I'm sorry for running late.